Hello and welcome to the Labor John podcast. Question mark. Are we still here? Yes, we are. And we'll be here till the day we die. Or the day that we get enough money that we can retire on. Whatever comes first. Hey, my name is Sam James, and I'm one of the co-hosts of this wonderful program that you are listening to at the moment. And my other co-host of the program that you listen to at the moment is...
I'm Gabe Christie.
No, he's not. He's a liar. Don't listen to this man. Actually, you're going to have to listen to him for the next hour because he's got a hell of a story to tell you. I don't know what he's going to say, but it's going to be beautiful. It's going to be sad. It's going to be tragic. It's going to be solidifying? Solidarity. We're going to have some fun with this episode is what I'm trying. Oh, God. Here comes the pictures. Oh, God.
So, you know how...
No.
The economy is stable and good, and eggs are affordable.
Yes. I like to think a long line of wonderful presidents.
Yes.
That. I don't blame just one. I blame them all. They are all at fault, sir.
I mean, from a broad historical perspective, you're not wrong, but we're going to be talking about the 1946 OPA protests, or the 1946 price control protests.
Oh, okay.
Because there was actually a time when the United States government tried to do something about inflation. Amazingly. And then they stopped doing stuff about inflation, and that's what we're going to talk about. So
at least it's not the 30s, and at least it's post World War II. So everything's great from here on out, Gabe.
So it's funny that you said that.
What? No.
So the origin of the OPA goes back to the 1930s.
At least it's not ancient Greece. Because I know your mind, Gabe. I know how far you can go back.
So depression, bad.
Yeah.
Okay. By 1939, it had started to get a little bit better in the U.S. Overseas, it was not better because the vile Hun and his villainous empire building. So this guy Hitler was causing problems in Europe, and then the Empire of Japan had learned all of the worst lessons from Western empires and decided that they needed an empire too. So they were expanding their territory into China, specifically threatening Dutch access to the Philippines and threatening U.S. hegemony, or Dutch access to New Guinea and threatening U.S. hegemony in the Philippines.
They share an access point with the Dutch.
Basically, Japan was trying to create a Pacific empire, which, like, in terms of the broadness of the world, I mean, fair enough. They're not the first nation to try and do that.
Yeah.
But anyway, all of that turmoil led the U.S. or led parts of the U.S. government and the U.S. military to start getting a little bit nervous and to kind of recognize that there's probably going to be another war soon, and we should probably get ready for that.
Oh.
So,
but we just had the war to end all wars.
And it didn't work,
What?
Surprisingly.
Damn it. Who's naming this shit?
I know.
I got a great idea, guys. World War II.
Ooh. Well, so the problem was that they named the war to end all wars too well, and everyone believed it. I shouldn't call this a problem. The U.S. military did what it should do after a major conflict, which was decrease in size.
Fair play.
So it demobilized in 1918. And since then, they had basically had a mostly isolationist foreign policy, with the big asterisk of sending troops,
Yeah.
supplies, and weapons to the White Army during the
We'll,
Russian Civil War. But
we'll still sell you shit.
yeah. So they were mostly trying, or basically the US military went down to like an absolutely tiny, tiny size, which today is unfathomable, but was just how they did shit back then. Now that caused problems in the 30s because Japan was expanding. There was the war in Spain. The Spanish Civil War in Spain had turned into a proxy war between the USSR and Nazi Germany. Italy invaded Ethiopia, and it was clear that Germany was probably going to start expanding in Europe. So we started very cautiously, like laying out plans to rearm and to rebuild the US military. But as part of that, someone actually sat down and looked at the economic side of World War One and was like, hey, this was actually kind of bad for the average person.
Hey,
maybe we should do something about that.
Okay.
Because immediately after World War One, there was just massive inflation, which you can see in this lovely chart that Uncle Sam's pointing to.
Hey.
And basically what happened was the US government had been pumping huge amounts of money into the economy for the war effort. And then once the war stopped, they just turned that spigot off.
Oh, man.
And then the economy tanked and inflation shot up. And then all of these troops coming back from World War One, expecting to like come back to a job and maybe some level of stability. No, that didn't happen. Which is why, we had one of the reasons why we had a massive post-war strike wave.
Interesting.
Yeah. So the government was trying to figure out, how do we prevent that from happening again? All right, so in order to avoid all of the inflation problems that they were having, as the US started to gear up for World War II, they developed something called they developed a plan for price controls. This was already building on some of the ideas that they'd had from the New Deal, where the National Resource Planning Board was coordinating the use of natural resources all across the US.
Oh.
And so that was just like raw industrial materials. That wasn't like consumer products, but it was still one of the first times that the US was really laying out basically a planned economy. They went through and were like, okay, we have X amount of coal. We know that these factories in this state need this amount of coal. How do we distribute that? And it was still done through like purchases and markets and whatnot. It wasn't like a full nationalization system, but there was at least some federal oversight of like, one factory in Tuscaloosa can't buy up all of the coal coming out of West Virginia for a year.
All right, I like that.
Because that needs to be spread around throughout the whole country. So the by 1940, they recognized that they were going to have to expand on that and actually start controlling consumer goods. And so on 29th May 1940, which is about a year and a half before we actually entered the war, Roosevelt created the Council of National Defense Advisory Commission, which included price stabilization and consumer protection divisions. And these helped to keep prices stable and ensure equal access to essentials during the rearmament period before the war. Because the other thing that they were recognizing is that as you pumped money into the system, during rearmament, there was a possibility that consumer prices would end up going up because all of the money was going into like heavy industry.
Yeah.
And so you were trying to like shift the economy away from consumer goods, which would decrease consumer good production, which would then increase prices.
Got it.
Complicated stuff.
Got it, Gabe.
The solution was tariffs, obviously. So from the very beginning of all of this, the organized labor with both the AFL and the CIO were demanding that they have a seat at the table on these national price control boards, because they also recognize the possibility that corporate interests would take control of these boards and basically use them to monopolize everything.
Love it.
And like carve up the country into their own little fiefdoms. It was
today.
Yeah. Basically, they were trying to prevent what is done with like U.S. health insurance and multiple other natural monopoly industries that we have that we just kind of accept. So
here's a hint: we don't need to accept that.
Yeah, this is true. And
I don't want to give anybody any ideas, but I mean, you know.
And maybe we should
redacted.
Maybe we should demand worker representation on control boards for all of these. Possibly.
Yeah, I like this game.
So once the war started in earnest, they created the Office of Price Administration, or the OPA, which administered price controls and initially rationing on single items. So like coffee, flour, and milk, stuff like that. But throughout the war, the OPA expanded what they were controlling. So the OPA was tasked with controlling prices on basically everything except for agricultural commodities. It also issued rent controls and started doing rationing systems early on, especially for scarce or items that were more scarce. So like coffee was rationed, certain cuts of meat were rationed, and as the war went on, more and more things got added to the ration list. And they could also, in addition to doing price controls, they could also subsidize production of certain items to prevent a shortage.
Sure.
So it would basically like it allowed the US government to come in and effectively do a semi-planned market economy, which was a very novel idea at this point in the US.
Yeah. We'll get there.
Yeah. And so this actually proved very effective. So in addition to all of the goods that were getting diverted over to war production, you also had 10 million men inducted into the draft during the war. Out of a labor force of around 53 million, so 1 in 5 workers was no longer in a factory, farm, or field. So that meant that they weren't producing all of the everyday consumer goods that people needed. And there were also, like I was saying, everything shifted over to war production. So you had like canned food or food canneries that might have been making tinned peaches. Now those tinned peaches were being put into ration boxes and shipped overseas.
There you go. Okay.
Car companies started making military vehicles. Basically everything shifted over to massive amounts of war production. And that's also why OPA was really important for everyone at home, so that you could still go out and like have a can of peaches occasionally. The clip that I was trying to play was about 2 minutes out of like I think a 15-minute long animated film talking about price controls and how to navigate the system, and it was a complicated ration system. It was like every day you had different little stamps. It was a whole thing.
Oh God, not the stamps.
Yeah. OPA, whenever there was inflation on a product, OPA would step in and set a cap on the price. And then if there were, like I was saying, if they noticed that there was a decrease in production or there was likely to be a shortage, they could start subsidizing production and kind of flood the market with it to keep prices down.
All right.
And then there's the farm labor shortage. All this means that we at home will have less canned fruits, vegetables, soups, and other processed foods for our use. Without rationing of these foods, some people would get more than their fair share. Others would not even get what they need. But rationing assures everyone of his fair share. That is why your government is rationing canned fruits and vegetables and other processed foods. Until now, we have been rationing one item at a time, like sugar and coffee. But processed fruits and vegetables are not one product. They are hundreds of products in hundreds of different brands, grades, sizes, varieties. In cans, bottles, packages, in dried and frozen form. One cannot say, as in the case of sugar, each citizen will be allowed 2 cans of peaches a week or 4 cans of spinach. It may be true that some people don't like spinach. Some of you may want to buy canned corn. Others of you may want to buy canned peas or spinach. So the question arises, what method of rationing can be used so that each citizen may get his fair share of canned fruits and vegetables and other commercially packed foods, and that will still allow freedom of choice? The system which has been adopted and has worked successfully in England for over a year is called point rationing. In the point rationing system, all these foods are grouped together, and your ration book is used to buy those you like. Those items which are not so scarce will take fewer points. Items which are more scarce will take more points. Point stamps to buy these ration goods are in War Ration Book 2. This book contains blue and red stamps. Blue stamps are to be used for canned fruits, vegetables, soups, juices, and other processed foods. Red stamps will be used for meat. This is a typical page of blue stamps in War Ration Book 2. Notice that the stamps are given point numbers, 8, 5, 2, 1. Everyone will get 48 points each period. That means you will use blue stamps ABC for the first period, DEF for the second, and so forth. Point values will be the same in all stores. Every store in which you shop must post the official table of point values of all point rationed items in all sizes. From time to time, point values may change, and stores will post the new point values.
That worked pretty well throughout the war, but it did create a little bit of a black market.
Oh.
Because every time you try and regulate or ration something, people are going to take a little bit of extra money and try and get a little bit extra.
As you do.
Yeah. And like it's inevitable that that's going to happen. And one of OPA's primary functions, in addition to like issuing all of the ration books and all of that, one of their primary functions was actually as a regulatory agency for companies selling, or for businesses selling rationed goods. So if you found that like the grocer down the street was charging 5 cents more for a rationed item, then you could report him to OPA or to your local OPA price control board, who would then sue him for violating the Price Controls Act.
Ah.
And he would get fined or have his business license revoked.
Damn. Okay.
Yeah. And the local price control boards were generally made up of like people from the neighborhood. So it
That's
was
cool.
just kind of a cool little experiment in
Yeah.
democratic involvement, which like I don't know. This is why the 30s and 40s were just fascinating, because there was a lot of random little things like this. Okay, but bigger problem with food rationing and rationing in general was that the business community really, really did not like it, because they did not like being told what to do. So,
Well, ain't that a shame?
yeah. So, the National Association of Manufacturers and the Retail Dry Goods Association tried to get a guaranteed minimum profit on all products.
What?
Yeah.
A minimum profit?
Yep.
What are we doing?
So they didn't get squeezed by the price controls. From what I was able to find,
They want to pass on the squeezings to their consumers, Gabe.
Yeah.
Got to pass on the squeezings.
They wanted to make sure that they could still, make some shareholder value. And so what ended up happening is when the war ended and federal investment in all industries started to dry up, the NAM and NRDA, so NAM and NERDA, began to feel, they started to feel the squeeze even worse, because the whole system worked and everyone, like, the NAM and NERDA weren't really happy during the war, but they were willing to
But they had each other, Gabe. They had each other.
Yes, and that's really what counts. They weren't really happy, but because there was federal investment coming in, they were still able to make money.
Yeah, that's what matters.
Yeah, because they were still able to get federal contracts and keep all of that going. And also OPA, whenever they were in or facing financial troubles, OPA would subsidize production for stuff, and they would be able to make some money again.
Sure.
But that all started to dry up at the end of the war, or after the war ended in 1945. And that really freaked out all of the manufacturers, because now they still had price controls, so they couldn't charge whatever they wanted, but they no longer had this like endless slush fund of federal funny bucks coming in. So they started to ramp up pressure to lobby Congress to either weaken or remove the Office of Price Administration by June 1946, which is when it was set to expire. So everyone started to get nervous that they were just going to rip the Band-Aid off and let it just kind of go and let inflation go wild. So unions started leading a campaign to secure and expand all of their New Deal victories. And this was a broad thing. This is, if you remember the 1946 General Electric strike and all of that, that was part of that whole push from especially the CIO unions and like UE trying to secure good post-war contracts and kind of keep that New Deal role going.
Yeah.
With varied levels of success, depending on the union. But part of that was also going out and protesting to keep OPA in power and make sure that the price controls, at least, even if they didn't stay in indefinitely, they wanted to make sure that it was a slow phase out rather than just ripping the Band-Aid off and letting inflation skyrocket.
Yeah. That's smart.
Yeah. They held a bunch of rallies all around the country. Basically, every major city had OPA or like Save the OPA rallies. On June 24th, so just like basically a week before OPA was going to expire, they held a huge rally in DC to lobby Congress to prevent OPA from just collapsing. And what ended up happening was Congress passed a weakened OPA bill at the end of June. And this effectively defanged OPA, really reduced its level of oversight, and it effectively was intended to kill it. And they were just they passed the bill just to say that, like, hey, we did something for OPA. But the intent was to get rid of it.
As it slowly smothers OPA.
Yeah. So that got to President Truman's desk on June 29th, and he vetoed it because he recognized that it was a bad bill.
Yeah.
And would effectively get rid of OPA. He came out and said, if I pass this, it's going to cause inflation. It would devastate the economy. This is going to be bad. He was especially worried about wage stabilization controls that they had established after the end of the war, because all of these troops were coming back coming back to their jobs again, or trying to find new jobs. And he knew that meant you had a glutted labor pool, which would drive wages down. And if you have that at the same time, you have inflation in prices, and he knew there was going to be a depression.
Yeah.
Almost immediately. And he didn't want that to happen. So he vetoed the bill, expecting that to be a signal to Congress to get off their asses and actually do something. Instead, Congress was just like, well, we can just let OPA die then.
Okay.
We don't have to do anything about it because the president vetoed it. Hey. So we don't have to pass another bill. So by the end of June, end of June 1946, OPA was basically dead.
Say it ain't so.
Yeah. And one of the major problems with that was, like I was saying, one of their major jobs was to prosecute violators of the price ceilings. And so that meant but OPA's closure meant that all of the offices were closed, and no one was sure what was going to happen with the the outstanding cases, and two, the way the bill or the way everything was worded was the price controls were still technically in effect and were still technically law, but the administration that enforced them no longer existed.
Yeah.
So you could have
what you gonna do?
Yeah. So basically everyone was just like, well, we can charge whatever we want because you don't have this agency to come and yell at us anymore. But then some people were still hesitant about that because they knew that technically, from my understanding of it, civilians could sue them in court, but it would require a lawyer to go and do it pro bono, probably. So that wasn't going to happen. But now we're going to finally recognize that Philadelphia exists.
Hey! A half hour into the goddamn episode.
Yep. So, as all of this has been going on, milk prices in Philly have been slowly rising since June 8th, or basically throughout the whole year of 1946. and they had, or by July 8th, they had already gone up by 35 cents since June 18th, which doesn't sound like much. And I realize I forgot to do the conversion for how much that should be this year, because these have been crazy weeks. So what was $1
No
in
excuses.
1946?
No excuses. Leave your comments below, everybody. What do you think the milk price is now? Is Gabe Googling? No, I think.
Let's see. Googling. It was okay. So milk prices went up by about $5.
Damn.
For a gallon of milk.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So, in addition to that, basically every other necessity and like consumer good started to inflate in price. Meat prices especially were bad, which was very interesting. And people at the time were making note of this. The inflation in meat prices didn't make sense because there was also increase in meat production. So all of, like meat was everywhere, but it was also getting more and more expensive. And I think it was probably because it had been rationed for 4 years, there was just a massive amount of demand for it.
Yeah.
And the meat producers recognized, like, oh, we can both flood the market and charge an arm and a leg for it, and we will make fucking bank.
Yeah.
So that's what they did.
Meat was everywhere is usually like the tail end of my Friday nights. So I gotta tell you.
Well, we're only like halfway through your Friday night, so you're ahead of schedule. So in response to all of the increase in like grocery prices, a CIO unions in Philly, and then a variety of unions in South Jersey started to get together to organize boycotts of grocers that were charging inflated prices.
I love it.
So on July 11th, 1946, Harry Block, who is the president of the Philadelphia Industrial Union Council, CIO, declared that the 75 locals of the CIO unions in Philly would enforce a boycott against any stores not abiding by the previously set OPA price ceilings.
Okay.
So they basically took the approach of like, OPA doesn't exist, but these laws still do, and we're just going to enforce them.
That's pretty damn cool.
Yeah. No, I love it. And that's what organization allows you to do, where you can just get 75 unions to say, hey, we're not going to shop at you, or we're not going to shop in your store if you aren't abiding by the law. So
yeah, I like it. Okay.
So in addition to the declaration that they were just going to generally boycott any store not abiding by the OPA regulations, they also specifically targeted the landlord Samuel Elgert, he had over 600 properties that he owned in the city.
Wow.
And basically the moment that rent controls went away, or at least weren't being enforced anymore, he jacked up rents by 75%.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
Damn, Sam. What are you doing?
Yeah. And basically all of his properties were in working class neighborhoods too.
Yeah. Well,
so
yeah. I saw that.
Yep. So they started picketing his offices directly, and basically just set up a constant picket line out front of his main office.
Love it.
Which I believe was at 7th and Locust, if I remember correctly. The building is still there, and you can still see it has Samuel Elgert carved into a big granite slab on the side.
Of course it does.
Yep. So, in addition to all of that going on in Philly, in South Jersey, the CIO, AFL, and Railroad Brotherhoods, which represented 1.2 million workers across the state, teamed up to enforce a milk boycott until the price came back down. And they just wanted to go back to the previously set OPA price ceiling. And that was their only demand. And they declared basically a boycott of every single dairy around Camden until prices went down. And after just one day of boycott around the Camden dairies, they declared a 30% decrease in milk delivery and purchases, which
is that's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean that's
pretty significant.
That's going to hurt your bottom line pretty quick. So that was a fairly effective. I mean, after just one day of boycott, that's also pretty good. Now, the other thing that they did, and what you can see in this lovely picture here, is they set up their own milk distribution system. So
that's called a cow.
Basically. So the unions were set up boycotting all of the dairies and grocers and everyone that were price gouging. And then at union halls, they were purchasing milk in bulk, bottling it, and then handing it out for free to union members. So that families could still get milk. Yeah.
I love it.
And that way the families were still getting milk. The price gougers were losing money. And they were also keeping the dairy farms that were supplying the milk in business.
Yeah.
Because they also recognized that, like, one of the things with boycotting perishable goods is that then you basically end up like ruining entire crops.
Yeah.
And so with milk, you might end up with a lot of cheese in the next couple of years. But in the meantime, you have a lot of spoiled milk. So this was proving very effective in Camden. There were 55 retail grocers that were picketed by the Industrial Union of Marine and Shipbuilding Workers of America, which was the only local of that union was at the New York shipbuilding plant in Camden. And so of those 55 grocers that were being picketed by the shipyard workers, 30 of them had already agreed to return to the June OPA prices by the middle of July. Then back in Philly, the 10,000 workers of Transport Workers Union Local 234.
Hey.
So at this point, all of the PTC workers started picketing Philly's dairies on July 12th. And they also started to, both TWU and the CIO in general in Philly started to organize rent strikes, mostly against that one guy, Samuel Elgert. But the implication was anyone caught raising rents in the city was going to start facing rent strikes. And then in a recognition of the fact that they were going to start facing some stiff opposition, the president of the Philadelphia Hotel Association declared that the 25 hotels that he represented in Philly would maintain all of the OPA prices. So I don't know how much OPA was regulating hotels, but presumably, yeah,
he's played it safe.
Yeah. Because I guess at this time, hotels also tended to have restaurants in them as well.
Yeah.
So that was probably part of it. And it also probably meant the abiding by OPA wage regulations too. So paying if not like a livable wage, then at least a federally recognized minimum wage.
Not a profitable wage, though.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing that like it could not have been that hard to turn a profit at OPA prices at this point, because you're still one, if you're charging lower prices, then you're going to get more business, and two, everybody was coming back from the war with wads of cash.
Yeah.
And
it's greed. It's just greed.
Yeah. They were doing it because they could, which is why everyone got really pissed off. So the boycotts in Philly started to prove fairly effective within just a couple of days. Like I said, they started on July 12th. By July 15th, the Independent Retail Grocers Association of Philadelphia, which represented all of the like smaller mom and pop non-chain grocery stores, agreed that they would abide by the June OPA prices. Though there was one guy, if you can see the picture on the right, this is a grocery store owner closing up shop because he couldn't purchase anything at OPA prices.
Oh.
So, but rather than raise his own prices, he said, I'm just going to close my doors and go on vacation until prices come back down. So he just closed his grocery store rather than raise prices, which...
Okay. And he went on vacation.
Yeah.
All right. It could do worse.
Yeah.
I love him saluting with his hat to the to the side.
I like to believe that wasn't a staged photo by the Inquirer, that was purely candid. So in addition to all the boycotts and pickets and rent strikes, unions also kept up pressure on elected leaders by holding massive rallies. On July 15th, the Women's Auxiliary of TWU Local 234 held a rally at City Hall where women and children protested high food and milk prices, which is what you can see on the left-hand side.
Mm-hmm.
The most important sign here is that ice cream cones are now 7 cents.
What? No! Burn it down.
Absurd.
That is insane.
Which, let's bring up 7 cents was, at least according to 2013dollars.com, $1.15, which it's just, I wish I could find an ice cream cone for $1.15, but
is it just the cone or the ice cream with it?
I'm assuming that's ice cream as well.
Okay.
But
that's still pretty cheap.
Yeah. I mean, still, in terms of like real purchasing power of your hourly wages, although these kids they have like another 2 years before they could go work in a factory. So
they get there.
Yeah, they're getting there.
They're just paid protesters anyway, Gabe.
Yeah. They're very, like, I'd say it's like 19 or 20 something year old George Soros at this point. Hadn't made any money, but was still paying all these protesters. So then, in addition to that protest, TWU 234, who they were just doing everything in 1946. They again called out the offices of Sam Elgert. And up in Nicetown, which was a majority black and working class neighborhood, with about 15% Polish and Italian immigrants. And also, not to dox myself, but
Okay.
is right on the other side of the railroad tracks from where I live.
Get him, FBI. Get him. Get him.
So
Move in.
The residents in Nicetown met at the Pulaski Hall on Hunting Park Ave, which still exists and is still rentable as a venue if they would like to sponsor us.
No, George Soros is sponsoring us this week, Gabe.
Yes. So they organized a tenants league to build support for a basically like neighborhood-wide rent strike to lower rents across all of Nicetown. And of the people that were there, 200 of them lived in units owned by Samuel Elgert.
Oh.
Just to give you a sense of like how much this man just controlled the residential market in Philly.
Surprised he wasn't mayor.
Yeah, he didn't need to be mayor. He already ran the city. He'd have less power as mayor.
For real.
But of those 200 people there, they reported that they had seen rent increases of 40 to 80% after OPA went away.
Come on.
So in like, basically, from what I can tell, OPA went away at the end of June, and then like July 1st, people were getting notices of rent increase. By the 18th, the rent strike plans had spread to the rest of the city. CIO pledged full support. The Philadelphia Industrial Union Council's Price Committee, which is also it was interesting to see that existed because they had a whole branch of the Industrial Union Council focused specifically on fighting inflation.
Bring it back.
Yeah. So they pledged to support the rent strikes by engaging in sit-down strikes against rent increases, saying that they had 175,000 members that were willing to participate.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, it wouldn't be a post-war story without talking about some conflict between the AFL and the CIO. The Teamsters, who were an AFL union, started complaining that the CIO's dairy boycotts were really just a partisan ploy to attack AFL union or to attack Teamsters milk delivery drivers.
Oh, God.
The CIO responded by saying that the AFL wasn't standing with the citizens and families who were struggling to pay for basic necessities.
Jeez.
This seems to be, or at least in our region, that seems to be mostly in Philly. Like I was saying, in New Jersey, it was CIO, AFL, and the railroad unions who very rarely engaged in this kind of thing, all teaming up to do these massive boycotts, which was surprising. But
yeah,
Philly has to be a little bit more antagonistic to ourselves.
Yeah, we have to be a little more Philly.
Yeah. So in South Jersey, they also had an attempt to enforce 3 days of OPA prices, but the Food Distributors Association of the Philadelphia trade area. There's a lot of weird organizations.
Okay. The FDA, the PTA, okay.
Yeah. Basically, the Philadelphia Grocery Store Owners Association is what they actually were, rejected the idea, arguing that their prices or their high prices were necessary because they were being charged high prices by the producers. And so they couldn't do anything until wholesale prices went down. He then went on to argue that the CIO pickets were illegal, as always. And
by the way,
funded by Soros. So then, honestly, the one thing I didn't see, which I'm very surprised about, is there wasn't a huge amount of red baiting. So
we'll get there. We'll get there.
Yeah. If this was 1947, I'm sure then they were just being like, if you've ever complained about the price of milk, then you're clearly a communist.
Oh, yeah.
So the CIO responded. Pardon me. Mayor Brunner stated that the accusation necessitated a 4-hour-long conference on July 20th.
Okay.
He wanted to have a special session to debate price controls and whether or not the CIO pickets were illegal. The CIO responded to that by saying that its members were too busy checking prices and enforcing their boycott to be bothered with the conference.
All right. I like it.
A great response.
I love it.
So pressure also started to build on city council to enforce rent controls, especially since while all of this was going on in Philly, Truman had been trying to resurrect some amount of the OPA and some kind of national price control system, but it just kept getting squashed in Congress.
Mm-hmm.
And he wasn't making any progress with it. So by the 20th, there was a proposal in City Council to return to the June 30th rent controls, which was the last day of OPA. They wanted to go back to those rent controls. Now we have a very painful slide. So nationally,
the graphs.
Yeah.
Fuck.
For those just listening, we have a graph of the consumer price index from January 1941 to January 1951. Dead center between 1946 and 1947, line go up. Line go up real quick. And this is the line you don't want to go up. It went from about 2.5% to 17.
That is steep.
Yeah, in the span of a month. So that happened because a new OPA bill was moving through Congress and got passed on the 22nd of July. And I always mess up his name, Robert Alfonso Taft,
friend of the show,
stated that Truman was likely to sign this new but severely compromised OPA bill.
Mm.
He didn't say it was severely compromised. He said that this was a new, good center, middle of the road, compromised, reasonable OPA bill. So the new bill technically restored the agency, but it had significantly weakened regulatory powers. And basically it was almost the same bill that Truman had vetoed at the end of June.
Mm.
But
wow.
This was
it got a fresh coat of paint though.
Yeah. This was also a midterm election year. So everyone was keeping an eye on what would happen in November because there were a lot of
fucking games we play.
Yep. There were lots of congressional seats were up for grabs.
Yeah.
And just weeks before the election, or just weeks before election day, meat producers who, like we said, had been fucking around with prices and production this entire time, basically staged their own capital strike. Refusing to distribute the meat that they had. So they just held cattle in stockyards and they wouldn't slaughter them. And they were just like, nope, we're just gonna have all of these cattle here and y'all can fucking deal with the higher prices.
Damn. All right.
Yeah.
The cattle are I'm okay with this actually.
Yeah.
Who needs PETA?
That's probably the most reasonable explanation for this, that all of these meat production companies suddenly started listening to PETA and decided to not slaughter all of their cattle. No, really, they held their cattle on a capital strike, or they staged a capital strike until Truman agreed to lift price controls on meat, which he then agreed to do. But so he agreed to lift price controls on meat.
Yeah.
That caused massive inflation in the price of meat. Despite, again, the continued increase in production of said meat. And that happened right before the election. So Truman, or the Democratic Party and Truman's administration, got blamed for it, which then meant that the Democrats broadly got blamed for high prices and instability, and returned both the Congress and Senate to Republican control for the first time since 1933.
Okay.
That then set the stage for all of the lovely post-war laws like Taft-Hartley,
Hey.
and the conservative backlash against the New Deal that we're still dealing with.
Wow.
And it really all came down to
line go up
and bad line go up. But
why are things the way they are? Bad line go up,
bad line go up,
bad line go up,
and yeah.
Wow.
And but it was interesting to look into how the CIO was fighting against this.
Yeah. There was a lot of on the ground good stuff going on.
A lot of really well organized direct action. And I loved the idea of just doing milk distribution through the union.
I do like that.
I would love to see a local union councils just driving around distributing milk
on a milk float. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God. Okay. So we need the Philly AFL-CIO to buy a fleet of Mr. Softies and distribute ice cream for free to the children.
No, for 7 cents.
Or for 7 cents. Yeah.
7
We
cents.
need to go back to the June 30th OPA prices for everything.
That's the only way to fix this.
Yeah.
To make bad line go down.
Yeah.
7 cent ice cream cones, baby. That's where it's at.
Now, the one thing I didn't have access to, because we don't have the consumer price index information for 2025 yet. But it would be interesting to see the comparison of this line go up versus line go up after Liberation Day.
What a name. They're liberating our money from our wallets for us, Gabe.
It's that they are certainly doing that.
Yeah.
And they've been doing that for a long time.
Hey, there we go.
I do want to... and I also realized the two big line movements that you can see here. Yeah. So line go up in the middle of 1946 to 47, and then line go down real quick in the middle of 47 to 48, which was the post-war depression.
Ooh,
so
awesome.
We had this big inflation spike and then post-war depression. And it's interesting to see just human misery charted.
Wow. Thanks, Gabe.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that, buddy.
I know that's what you needed on a Friday night.
Well, I'm about to go get my meat. I'm about to go get my meat on.